Had I made a video like this, say 5 or 6 years ago, I'm fairly certain that a large majority of fans of the Zelda series, including me, would have answered with a resounding no, no, no. But as of late, I've seen more and more people being open to the idea, or even flat out calling for Nintendo to break the tradition of Link's silent demeanor and give him a proper voice. I myself started to think about this more when Gerard Khalil, aka The Completionist, addressed this in his review for Breath of the Wild back in 2017.
I will say, and maybe a ton of people will really disagree with me on this, but I think it's time to give Link a voice.
As well as Angry Joe's take on the matter.
And I get that he's supposed to be you, and you're supposed to project yourself onto him. But in my opinion, it's 2017, and those are born from older game limitations.
And since then, I too have slowly become more open to the idea of Nintendo giving it a shot in future installments. Now, I'm not here to tell you whether or not Link should have a voice or not. I'm just here to give my 2 cents on it. And no matter which direction Nintendo decides to take it, I will always remain a loyal fan of the series either way. So if you disagree, that is totally fine. And I actually encourage a discussion on the matter, because at the end of the day, we all want what's best for the series, right? So what is it about a voiced Link that has people on the fence? And why has Nintendo been reluctant to give it a try, even to this day? Obviously, in the early days, it was mostly due to technical limitations. Primitive sound chips and limited storage capacity gave devs a hard time incorporating good quality sound and music into their games. God knows they tried though, but it wasn't exactly the most pleasant thing to listen to. But as technology advanced, this became less and less of a problem. Still, even to this day, audio is one of the biggest culprits when it comes to the enormous file sizes of modern games, alongside high-quality textures. While Nintendo is known for its innovation when it comes to gameplay experiences, both in terms of software and hardware, they have also lagged behind on the competition on multiple occasions. And nowhere is this more clear than in the mid to late 90s. The N64's cartridges could only hold up to 64 megabytes of data, which is less than your average music album. Meanwhile, Sony fully embraced CD-ROM technology, which could store up to 660 megabytes, more than 10 times that of the N64's cartridges. It is no surprise then that the majority of games featuring a fully voiced cast, pre-rendered cutscenes and non-MIDI soundtracks are found here when it comes to this generation of consoles. The PC obviously being in a league of its own. Still, even on the N64, some games managed to incorporate plenty of voiced sections. Games like Perfect Dark and Conker's Bad Fur Day, which also happen to be among the biggest games on the system in terms of size, for obvious reasons. However, Ocarina of Time only utilized half of the storage capacity of its cartridge, so it's not like you could make the argument that they weren't able to at least have some spoken word in its cutscenes. It's clearly something they either felt was unnecessary or didn't fit the game, and honestly, I don't blame them. The audio quality for voices wasn't exactly the greatest back then due to the heavy compression needed to make it fit on the cartridge. Plus, there wasn't really a high standard for voice acting in video games yet like there is now. If anything, voice acting in Ocarina of Time would have probably dated the game a lot more. But gaming has come a long way since then. Nowadays you could fit every N64 game ever made onto one single Switch cartridge, which is kinda crazy to think about. But even when technology had already caught up, Nintendo was still hesitant to take it to the next level. Even as late as 2006, Nintendo was still resorting to mostly MIDI tracks for the music in The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. The same year that Oblivion made its debut, which not only featured a fully voiced cast, even for the most obscure NPCs, but also a fully orchestrated soundtrack to go with it. But one thing that Oblivion and later Skyrim and Zelda have in common is that the games feature a silent protagonist. Apart from the occasional grunts, they don't audibly speak neither during gameplay or in cutscenes. Silent protagonists have been around for a long time and will likely always stick around. And in Oblivion, the silent protagonist approach made sense, since you create your own custom avatar to your own liking. You can be a human, an orc, a furry, Mark Zuckerberg, whatever floats your boat. A big part of role-playing games like these is making a lot of choices. You can be a lying, stealing, murdering son of a bee, or a goody two-shoes who does everything by the book, or somewhere in between. This makes it very difficult to present a cohesive, cutscene-heavy narrative. I mean, it's kind of hard to be heralded as a big hero, the pinnacle of morality and bravery, when you just got done murdering the local blacksmith because he looked at you funny. But these issues don't matter for the Zelda series because the games have never been heavy on choices. You play as a pre-established hero set on a predetermined path and with a specific physique and skill set. And unlike games like Fallout and Skyrim, you don't get to choose whether or not Link is good at bartering or how much charisma or intelligence he has. You don't get to murder innocent civilians or step out of character all of a sudden. No matter what kind of person you are, Link will do what is required of him to complete his adventure. Sure, you can waltz into a stranger's house and smash up their pottery, but aside from that and a few small choices here and there, it has little to no impact on the actual outcome. Every cutscene will always play out the same way, and the end goal too remains the same. And that is how Zelda is meant to be, in my opinion. I don't want Zelda to become like Oblivion, where I can make Link do the most horrible things and yet still somehow be heralded as a hero. But that doesn't mean that giving him a voice ruins or changes that experience. In fact, as early as Zelda 2, it's already been made clear that Link does speak, and across the whole series this is confirmed time and time again. Characters who ask him his name and then reiterate it based on his answer. Every dialogue choice you make is him saying that sentence, causing the other character to react accordingly. Heck, we even hear him speak in the Wind Waker. Only 2 words, but hey, it's a start. No matter how shallow some of his incarnations are, every Link does in fact have a distinct personality of their own. I mean, can you honestly put Wind Waker Link, Skyward Sword Link, and Breath of the Wild Link next to each other and make the argument that they are all the exact same person but with different looks? Heck no. That is why when it comes to the argument that Link needs to stay silent because he's the vessel through which we experience the adventure, I have to say, sorry, but I don't buy it. I don't buy this argument anymore. There are tons of examples of games featuring a voiced protagonist which still allow players to step into their shoes. I don't know about you, but when I play Uncharted or Horizon Zero Dawn, I find no issues projecting myself onto Nathan Drake or Aloy. I can still be that character despite them having a completely different personality than that of my own. After all, narrative-driven video games are often about stepping into someone else's shoes and experiencing their journey, regardless of personality, physique, or gender. In The Last of Us, I am Joel. In Tomb Raider, I am Lara Croft. In Tetris, I am the Tetris block. Needless to say, not every game needs a voiced protagonist. When I play Luigi's Mansion 3 or Animal Crossing, I never think to myself, man, why can't these characters just have normal conversations instead of this weird semi-gibberish? I mean, the games aren't exactly plot-heavy. They're meant to be simple, fun adventures centered around gameplay. And while gameplay is equally important in the Zelda series, it is also one of Nintendo's more cinematic and story-driven IPs. And it's clear that Nintendo thinks the same way given the fact that they recently introduced voice acting. It's clearly a step that they felt was necessary to take the series to the next level. And here's the thing, Breath of the Wild still kinda managed to get away with having a silent Link, because it kept its story to an absolute minimum. All the voiced sections are saved for cutscenes only, which are few and far between. The rest of its story is told through its environment, and during gameplay it still falls back to text-based conversations. And you know what, I'm totally fine with that. In fact, I think there's a charm to reading the dialogue and imagining the conversation in your head. I've never been the biggest fan of the modern-day approach, where you and the NPCs stare awkwardly at each other while they exchange words. Something always seemed a bit off about having your character just stand there, dead-eyed, while you choose your dialogue option, but that's just me. Another problem with this approach is that you're never going to be able to have hundreds of voice actors for every NPC in the game, which often results in a lot of reused voices, and not every voice actor is going to be as good as the others. It doesn't ruin my experience of a game by any means, but I just can't imagine something like this in a Zelda game. I am more than happy if they just stick to text-based conversations for the majority of the gameplay. Cutscenes is a different story, however. As of right now, we don't know what Breath of the Wild sequel will do when it comes to its narrative, so it's hard to say if a voiced Link will even be necessary in that game. But if it's going to take even the slightest bit of inspiration from Age of Calamity, then I feel like Nintendo might need to consider giving it a try. Because Age of Calamity is where the first cracks in this silent approach really started to rear its head. This game has a lot of cutscenes, like 3 hours worth of cutscenes. And here's my main point, the more people around Link start talking, the more awkward it's gonna become to have him stay totally silent. In previous games, everything was based on dialogue boxes and ad-libs, which was fine for the time and it was consistent. But now that close to every character has started speaking, Link stands out more and more as this weird anomaly. Okay, I just realized how inconsiderate and insulting this can sound to someone who's actually mute in real life. So I want to make it clear that I am by no means saying that you are weird. In fact, you are awesome. I'm just talking about video games here. Like I said before, Link isn't really mute. People ask him questions, he answers. The only reason we don't hear him speak is because Nintendo simply refuses to do it. Just wanted to make that clear. Anyway, Breath of the Wild broke a lot of conventions, and in some aspects it seems like Nintendo still had one foot in the past, and didn't dare to go all the way with it. If Nintendo plans to continue this trend of having a fully voiced cast, I think it would be wise if they choose a more consistent format. Generally, games have 3 different approaches when it comes to dialogue. Either everyone speaks, everyone but the protagonist speaks, or nobody speaks and it's all done through text, body language, or gibberish and ad-libs. There are examples of games which do the same thing as Breath of the Wild. They don't feature a wide array of narrative choices and have a pre-established main character, yet still choose to have a silent protagonist while everyone else is voiced. HalfLife being a good example of this. Now, don't get me wrong, the HalfLife series is absolutely amazing. It is to this day in my top 10 favorite franchises of all time. But even here, the silent approach to the main character, Gordon Freeman, is starting to show its age, if you ask me. Especially since there isn't really a point to him being silent anymore. In Half-Life 1, most NPCs didn't contribute much to the story other than to help set the mood for the chaos and devastation inside the laboratory. Besides, this game came out in like 1998. But in Half-Life 2, and even more so Half-Life 2 Chapter 1, large portions of the game sees Alex Vance accompanying you on your journey through City 17, and she talks. Quite a lot, in fact. She has a very strong personality and is actually one of my favorite companion characters in any game to this day. At the time it didn't really bother me that much, but looking back at it now I can kinda see the awkwardness of having one character talking your ears off and the other, well, not talking at all. And similar to Link, it's not like Gordon is incapable of speech either. He is, but for some reason we don't hear it. We're supposed to imagine it, I guess. This creates this weird dynamic where Alex basically has to reiterate to the player what it is that Gordon might be saying to her. And who knows, it might even be the reason why their latest game, Half-Life Alyx, has you play as her instead of Gordon. If what is being speculated is true and we see Link and Zelda work together a lot more in Breath of the Wild 2, it's unavoidable that we get the same dynamic seen in Half-Life 2, where Zelda has to act like Link is speaking or ignore the fact that he isn't, and act as Link's voice and has to reiterate his imaginary dialogue to us. This would be fine, of course, but if the goal is to see these two form a closer connection, having Link stay silent might get in the way of that. There would always be this brick wall where Link isn't able to express his feelings and emotions properly. Now, suppose Nintendo indeed decides to give Link a voice. This of course doesn't mean he has to all of a sudden be an open book and rattle off dialogue after dialogue. In fact, it was one of my gripes when I recently played Horizon Zero Dawn for the first time. I love Aloy as a character, but this chick talks to herself way too much for my taste. I know she's supposed to be an outcast who's used to being on her own and stuff, but I think they took it a step too far.
Red light. Guess that means no power. A holographic interface. Must be some kind of code. Resources? That makes 1. That's 2. Okay, that did it. Sounds like that did it. If I find more, I should be able to get to that ancient armor I found.
It doesn't even really feel like she's talking to herself because she's just weird that way, but rather because she's trying to give constant exposition to the player. I hate this in movies and I hate it in video games too. I know this is personal, but when I'm exploring a dark and spooky hallway, I don't need to constantly hear the character's thoughts on the situation. It works when you have 2 characters who are sharing their thoughts and observations with each other, but on a solo mission it just comes off as if the devs are directly trying to tell you what's going on in case you missed it. So when it comes to Link, I'm all for not having him talk during gameplay. And as for cutscenes, you can still have a protagonist who doesn't speak much, but once in a blue moon, having them say at least something would already go a long way. I mean, even Silent Bob at least says something once in a while when it's necessary.
Just f***ing say it already! The sign on the back of the car said Critters of Hollywood! You dumb f***!
Again, I want to reiterate that this argument is based on the assumption that Breath of the Wild sequel will focus more on the bond between Link and Zelda. If this is not the case and the story is equally as minimalistic as Breath of the Wild, a voiced Link may not be necessary and they might want to save it for a future title, one that's more story-driven like Skyward Sword. So with all this in mind, I get the reasons why people might still be on the fence about the idea of Link speaking. The first one being bad examples set by past experiences. We all know what I'm talking about.
I can't wait to bomb some Dodongos!
Yes, the cheesiness of the 90s sure did put a dent in people's confidence when it comes to Link being voiced, but we have to keep in mind that none of these cringe fests were made by Nintendo themselves, and I don't think this should dictate whether or not Nintendo gives it a shot in their own creations. I think with the release of Breath of the Wild and even more so Age of Calamity, Nintendo has shown that they are more than capable of presenting believable characters with the right voice actor. Not always, of course, which leads into the next point, the fear of choosing the wrong voice. And yeah, this is a fear I can totally get behind. Choosing the right voice actor can make or break a character. We've already seen a bit of a divide when it comes to Zelda's voice. Some think she's fine, while others are less enthusiastic about it, let's just put it that way. If the voice of the main character is off, it could hamper the enjoyment of the game, which also ties into the next aspect, a general fear of change. Change can be difficult and scary, especially with a series that's so dearly beloved by its fans. We already caught a glimpse of this during the announcement of the Wind Waker back in 2002. Safe to say, a lot of people were not happy with the sudden change in art style. Of course, this sentiment was quickly brushed away by most once we saw how amazing and charming the game actually was, and I think if there's one fanbase that should be open to change, it's the Zelda community. We are used to change. This is a franchise that has altered its art styles, gameplay, and so many other aspects so many times since its inception. The series is one of the most experimental ones out there, and one of the reasons why it's still going strong after so many installments. Some might argue that it would be weird if Link all of a sudden starts talking, especially if it's the same Link from Breath of the Wild and Age of Calamity. Well, I mean, Dead Space did the same thing, and nobody complained about that. In the first game, Isaac was silent, which was fine because he was alone and isolated for the majority of his journey. But as the games became more story-driven and more voiced characters got involved in Dead Space 2 and 3, the devs made the decision to give him a voice. I think it would be a shame if the idea of a voiced Link is scrapped altogether just to play it safe. How will we know if it's an improvement or not if they never try? Even if it fails, I doubt it would completely ruin a Zelda game altogether. The gameplay will undoubtedly still be amazing. Now, you might say Zelda doesn't need voice acting to be good, and I agree. The series has been more than competent in portraying its story without the use of spoken word, but just because something is already good, is that really a valid argument not to try something new? Or would you miss out on the opportunity to make it even better? Personally, I think the latter is the case here. What if it ends up working extremely well? Maybe 5 years from now we wouldn't have it any other way. Breath of the Wild broke so many conventions for the series, some for the worst and some for the better. But the good changes have been so monumental, I honestly can't imagine a 3D Zelda game releasing after this that doesn't have climbing, that doesn't feature something akin to the paraglider, or the physics and chemistry engine. What if a voice-acted Link ends up being another one of these improvements? Is it worth playing it safe for the rest of the series' lifespan just because of the fear that it might not be an improvement? I will leave that up to you to decide. Me, I am more open to the idea than ever before. Thank you all for watching. A shout out goes to my amazing Patreon supporters and channel members who make these videos possible, some of which have recently joined the cause, so give a warm welcome to Johnny Peacock, Glenn Klecker, Zaydan Dragmeyer, Yoshi6500, and Dare Delavid. You guys are the best. Thanks a lot for your support. That is all for now. This is Don signing off, and have a good one.